we're driving the train on this. So I don't want. I mean, we're going to work with Congress on this, but I think that the president, as you've heard through multiple times, the president be very clear. This is a huge priority for him, something that he feels very passionately about.
Well, that was White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer addressing the big pivot. That's right, we're going from health care to taxes. This after the Republican health care bill was pulled from consideration on Friday. Concernings are mounting, though, about the failure and how it could impact the rest of the White House agenda. How does taxes get done right now without any other mishaps? Joining me to discuss, Gabby Morrongiello, Brian Brenberg, and Kevin Paul Scott. Gabby, let me start with you. I think it can be done, and I think perhaps you use the failure of the replacement bill as something of a guideline on how to get it done.
Well, I'm a bit more cynical than that, Charles. If you look at the lessons that we learned with the battle over health care, we now know that the Freedom Caucus is not going to be a rubber stamp for this administration's legislative agenda. And they've already expressed sharp opposition to things like the border adjustment tax, and they've claimed that it's not necessary to have a revenue-neutral tax cuts, which are things that GOP leadership, House Speaker Paul Ryan particularly, would like to see in any form of tax reform. So I think that there's going to be some battles to be had between GOP leadership and more conservative members of Congress, again, if they move directly to tax reform without really taking into account the lessons that should be learned from the health care battle.
Well, hopefully they'll get everyone on, in a room somewhere before they roll it out to the public. But, Kevin, I think with the Freedom Caucus actually saying, hey, we're not going to be sticklers over this sort of deficit thing was an olive branch of sorts. In fact, I think that's perhaps the best news of the day going into this next level, to this next effort from the White House.
I would agree with you. I think they've got to bring Republicans together on this particular issue. I know former Speaker Gingrich was talking about tackling infrastructure first because it would be easier to accomplish. The problem is if you get a whole bunch of Democrats on board and you lose the Freedom Caucus, you run the risk of alienating them over the next year or so. And so I think it's very important that you get tax reform passed, you do it with the help of the Freedom Caucus, and you unite Republicans around this issue. That's how Donald Trump gets a win under his belt and is able to have some momentum going forward.
Okay, I want to remind the audience the reason they did Obamacare first was to get some lower taxes to work with a baseline because, of course, when they do this new bill, Brian, and you have lower rates, you're going to have revenue missing. And that revenue missing means more deficits, more debt. And they were trying to sidestep that. So if you don't have that, there's going to be a lot more pressure for the border adjustment tax. I personally think that would be a mistake. I think it's going to hurt middle-class folks. But how else do they get around that?
Well, you can get around it in a reconciliation bill if you just say, look, this thing's going to sunset after 10 years. And I actually think that's becoming very likely here. I don't think the president cares if this is revenue neutral. I think he wants tax cuts. He wants a win. And he's going to say, if we have to sunset it after 10 years, we'll do that because in that 10-year period, people are going to like what they see, and we're going to get this thing permanent within those 10 years. So I think he's going to say, let's just get a win here. Forget about the border adjustment tax. That's complicated. That's the kind of thing that tanked health care reform. We don't want any of that.
You know, Gabby, I think the idea that people say, hey, you know what, you'll actually keep more of the money that you make, and as a consequence, you'll spend more, you'll get velocity of money coming in. Certainly supply-side economics are going to play a major role here. We've seen this be successful before, where the American public, particularly conservatives, look the other way if it means that near term our debt goes up, maybe 21, maybe 22, maybe 23 trillion.
Well, I mean, if you look at the structure in the White House and some of the key policy advisors that are working with President Trump and House Speaker Paul Ryan on things like tax reform, there is adamant opposition to raising the debt ceiling, to making sure that there is not an increase in the federal deficit caused by a non-revenue neutral tax cut. And so I think that there is pressure for them to look into what their options are on this. But definitely, you talked a little bit about the opposition to the border adjustment tax and whether there's any flexibility on that. I think that President Trump has been willing to be flexible, but that is one thing that he's actually come around on. If you recall his initial opposition to that, he said that there was no way that he would support a VAT tax. Right. But in an interview just published this weekend, he said, look, I'm the king of VAT taxes. So I think that there's really some areas for him to work with the House Freedom Caucus caucus to work with the Tuesday group and more moderate, centrist Republicans to hopefully get something like this through.
Kevin, listen, I don't know. We know it's complicated. How do you see it playing out? Do you think it would involve include a border adjustment tax?
I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. I think this is the issue. A lot of people are frustrated with Speaker Ryan, or at the end of the day, this is something that President Trump needs to lead on. He is supposed to be the deal maker, and I think he needs to go. He needs to bring these parties together and make sure the deal gets done. If tax reform doesn't happen, it's not going to be on Speaker Ryan. It's going to be on President Trump. He can make this happen, but he's got to lead on it.
Yeah, I think the president, he wants something he can explain to the American people. He wants a vanilla tax cut where he can say, this is good, here's how it's going to affect you. That's why he doesn't want the border adjustment tax. That's why he doesn't care about deficits. He wants to get the economy growing. I think he's going to come back on message there, and that's how he's going to provide leadership.
And we're all going to break out the tambourines, and we're going to be a lot richer. All right, guys, thank you all very much.